Bullies mocked the newcomer. They had no idea he was a kickboxing champion. Ethan Parker, 15 years old, nervously stared at the front of Kennedy High School, adjusting the strap of his backpack. It was his first day since his family had moved from Albany to New York City. At first glance, Ethan seemed like an easy target. Slim, average height, rectangular glasses constantly slipping down his nose, and slightly hunched shoulders, betraying his shyness. What no one at Kennedy High could have imagined was that behind this harmless appearance hid a young kickboxing champion with 3 national titles in his category. His father, a professional coach, had trained him since the age of 7. "Remember, Ethan," his father would often repeat, "martial arts are for protection, not for intimidation." Ethan had embraced this philosophy so deeply that it became his personal mantra. In Albany, he had never needed to use his skills outside the ring, but something about the atmosphere at Kennedy High gave him an uneasy feeling in his stomach. The school was an imposing 3-story building with a central courtyard where students gathered before the first class. As Ethan walked down the main hallway, he noticed curious glances directed at him. Being the new kid was always hard, but he hoped to stay under the radar. That hope vanished when, turning a corner, he accidentally bumped into Ryan Collins. Ryan was the undisputed king of Kennedy High, a tall, muscular captain of the football team, with a grin that melted half the girls in the school. Always by his side were his loyal lieutenants, Dylan Carter and Scott "Skinny" Harris. The 3 formed a feared trio. "Hey, watch where you're going, Four Eyes!" Ryan shouted, shoving Ethan into the lockers. The metallic clang made several students turn their heads. Ethan simply lowered his gaze. "Sorry," he mumbled, trying to continue on his way. But Ryan wasn't done. "Did you hear that, guys? The new kid stutters," he sneered, blocking Ethan's path. "What's your name, shrimp?" "Ethan," he replied softly without looking up. "Ethan," Ryan mocked in a squeaky voice as Dylan and Scott laughed. "Welcome to Kennedy High, Ethan. We have a little tradition for newbies, don't we, guys?" The other 2 nodded with malicious grins. Ethan clenched his fist in the pocket of his hoodie, feeling adrenaline start to pulse through his veins. He took a deep breath, recalling his father's teachings. Not the time, not the place. "I have class," he said, calm but firm, stepping around the trio and walking away as their laughter echoed behind him. The first weeks at Kennedy High were difficult for Ethan. What began as minor incidents, casual shoves in the hallways, mocking comments during class, giggles when he passed by, soon escalated into more humiliating situations. In the cafeteria, Ryan accidentally dumped his tray of spaghetti all over Ethan's clothes. In gym class, Dylan hid his uniform, forcing him to wear a ridiculous oversized spare. During group work, Scott spread rumors that Ethan had cried while giving a presentation. The literature teacher, Mrs. Eleanor Grant, seemed to be the only one who noticed something was wrong, though she never directly intervened. "If you ever need someone to talk to," she told him one day after class, leaving the offer hanging in the air. Ethan simply nodded politely and left quickly. The backyard near the basketball courts became Ethan's most dangerous zone. That was the trio's headquarters, and where Ethan experienced his worst moments. One afternoon, as he tried to take a shortcut through the area, Ryan's voice called out, "Well, well, Ethan, what a surprise seeing you here." Ethan stopped, evaluating his options. He could turn around, but that would only give them the satisfaction of seeing him run. He decided to move forward and ignore them, a bad choice. Within seconds, the trio had surrounded him. Dylan snatched his backpack and began pulling out notebooks, throwing them to the ground. Scott laughed while filming everything on his phone. "Let's see what secrets our friend Ethan's hiding," Ryan teased as he pulled Ethan's phone from his jacket pocket. "Oh, and what do we have here?" Blood froze in Ethan's veins. His gallery contained photos from kickboxing competitions. If they see those, my secret will be exposed. For a moment, he considered stopping them by force. His muscles tensed, ready for action. But he held back. It still wasn't time. "Give me back my phone," he said, surprisingly calm, even to himself. Ryan raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the sudden change in tone. "Wow, listen to the little mouse. And what are you gonna do if I don't?" Ethan held his gaze, not blinking. "I'm just asking you to return it." Something in his tone made Ryan hesitate for a second, but he quickly regained his mask of superiority. "Let's make it more fun. If you want your phone back, get on your knees and beg like a good little dog." Dylan and Scott's laughter echoed around the yard. A few passing students stopped to watch, forming a small circle around the scene. No one intervened. No one ever did when it came to Ryan and his crew. Ethan felt the burn of humiliation in his chest, mixing with the suppressed rage that threatened to burst out. Just then, a voice rang from the other end of the yard. "Hey, what's going on here?" It was Coach Victor Adams, the PE teacher, walking briskly toward them. Ryan quickly slipped Ethan's phone into his pocket. "Nothing, Coach Adams. We're just talking," he replied with his most innocent smile. Coach Adams looked at Ethan, who stood with his head lowered. "Everything okay, Parker?" Ethan nodded silently, picking up his scattered notebooks. There was no point in involving the teacher. It would only make things worse. "All right, move along, everyone," Coach Adams ordered, dispersing the spectators. "And you three better be on time for gym tomorrow, got it?" The trio nodded as they walked away, and Ryan whispered to Ethan, "This isn't over, Parker. We'll finish our talk tomorrow." That night, lying in bed, Ethan replayed the incident in his mind. Thankfully, Coach Adams had insisted on getting his phone back before letting them go. But the humiliation remained. For weeks, he had silently endured the bullying, hoping they'd eventually get bored and leave him alone. But now he realized they wouldn't stop. With a sigh, he got up and headed to the small gym his father had set up in the garage. He needed to release his frustration. As he struck the heavy bag with precision and force, his father's words echoed in his head. "A true warrior knows when to fight and when to restrain himself." After an hour of intense training, Ethan made a decision. He would hold back no longer. He wouldn't use his strength to attack, but he would no longer allow them to trample on his dignity. It was time to set boundaries. The next day, he walked into Kennedy High with renewed determination. His posture was straighter, his gaze more confident. A few classmates noticed the change, watching him curiously as he made his way through the corridors to his first class. During lunch break, Emily Carter, a girl from his math class with whom he had barely exchanged a few words, sat next to him in the cafeteria. "You look different today," she observed, studying him with interest. "More collected." Ethan smiled slightly. "Maybe." "Everyone's seen what Ryan and his friends have been doing to you," she continued, lowering her voice. "It's not fair, but nobody dares stand up to them." "You too?" Ethan asked, without any accusation in his tone. Emily lowered her gaze, embarrassed. "I guess I'm not as brave as I'd like to be." "Sometimes courage isn't about standing up to others, but standing up to yourself," Ethan replied, surprising himself with his own maturity. Their conversation was cut short by the appearance of Ryan and his gang, who approached their table with mocking expressions. "Look who's got himself a girlfriend," Ryan shouted, drawing laughter from nearby students. "Couldn't you find someone better, Emily?" Her face flushed, but before she could respond, Ethan slowly stood up. A tense silence spread through the cafeteria. "That's enough, Ryan," he said, his voice calm but firm. Surprise was evident on Ryan's face, who clearly hadn't expected such a reaction. He quickly masked it with a sneer. "Sorry, what did you say, Parker?" "I said enough," Ethan repeated, holding his gaze, not blinking. "You've humiliated me, stolen from me, tried to intimidate me. That's over." The entire cafeteria held its breath. No one, absolutely no one, had ever confronted Ryan Collins so directly. Well, Ryan answered, recovering from his initial surprise. "Looks like the little mouse found his voice. And what are you gonna do about it, huh?" Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he calmly picked up his tray. "I'm not going to fight you, Ryan. I'm not afraid of you, but I have nothing to prove to you either." As he turned to leave, Ryan grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. Dylan blocked his path while Scott began filming, eager for what was coming next. Ryan leaned in close, his face inches from Ethan's. "No one talks to me like that, got it?" he whispered with restrained fury. "No one." Ethan felt the push before he had time to react. His tray crashed loudly to the floor, and he had to grab the table to keep from falling. Now the entire cafeteria was watching. Some looked worried, others excited, most simply relieved that they weren't the target. "After school, behind the courts," Ryan said, emboldened by the approving whispers of his classmates. "We'll show you what happens when someone thinks they're smarter than us." Ethan calmly picked up his backpack from the floor. He didn't respond to the threat, only gave a slight nod before leaving the cafeteria. Throughout the rest of the day, word of the upcoming showdown spread like wildfire. By the time the final bell rang, everyone at Kennedy High knew that Ryan Collins and the new kid were going to settle things behind the basketball courts. Ethan stopped by his locker to drop off a few books before heading to the meeting spot. As he walked through the corridors, he felt the stares following him, some sympathetic, others filled with morbid curiosity. No one expected him to survive the beating Ryan and his crew were sure to deliver. Emily caught up to him just before he stepped outside. "You don't have to do this," she said, genuine worry in her voice. "You can talk to the principal, report them." Ethan shook his head. "This is more than just Ryan and his threats. This is about setting boundaries, about not letting fear dictate my life." "But it's 3 against 1, she insisted. Ethan smiled slightly. "Appearances can be deceiving, Emily." And with those cryptic words, he headed toward the courts. The backyard was unusually crowded for the end of the school day. Students from every grade had gathered, forming a semicircle and leaving an open space in the middle where Ryan, Dylan, and Scott were already waiting. The rumor had spread so fast that even some teachers seemed aware of it. Coach Adams stood at a distance, watching, ready to intervene if things got out of hand. Seeing Ethan approach, Ryan flashed a smug grin. Well, I thought you'd run away like the coward you are." Ethan set his backpack on the ground and stepped forward, his expression calm, which only unsettled Ryan further. He had expected to see fear in Ethan's eyes, but there was none. "I'm not a coward, Ryan, and I don't want trouble. But if you insist, I won't hold back anymore." Dylan and Scott laughed. "Hold back, you?" Dylan mocked. "What are you gonna do, throw books at us?" Ethan remained unfazed. "One last chance. We can end this right here. Everyone goes their own way, and tomorrow we start fresh." The offer sounded so absurd, coming from someone supposedly defenseless, that Ryan couldn't help but laugh out loud. "You hear that, guys? Parker's giving us a chance." He stepped even closer, invading Ethan's personal space. "The only one who needs a chance here is you, loser." and with that, he shoved him hard, trying to make him fall. But Ethan, anticipating the move, barely shifted. The surprise on Ryan's face was obvious, but quickly replaced by anger. He threw a punch, but this time Ethan moved with such speed and precision that gasps rippled through the crowd. With a smooth motion, he dodged the strike, and using Ryan's momentum, unbalanced him with a simple arm deflection. Ryan stumbled, completely thrown off by what had just happened. "What the hell?" he muttered as Dylan and Scott exchanged bewildered glances. The crowd began whispering in disbelief. No one could believe what they were seeing. The shy new kid had just effortlessly avoided Ryan Collins' attack. "I warned you," Ethan said calmly. "I don't want to fight, but I know how to defend myself." The humiliation only fueled Ryan's rage. "Get him!" he ordered his friends, who hesitated for a second before charging at Ethan. What happened next left everyone speechless. With precise, controlled movements, Ethan dodged, blocked, and neutralized every attack. He didn't strike to hurt, only used their own force and inertia against them. Dylan ended up on the ground after Ethan smoothly flipped him from an attempted grab. Scott retreated, rubbing his arm after receiving a painful but non-injurious block. Seeing his friends defeated so easily, Ryan, in a desperate move, pulled a knife from his pocket. A collective gasp echoed through the yard. This was no longer just a school fight, it had become something far more serious. "Enough!" Coach Adams shouted, stepping forward. But he stopped when Ethan raised his hand, signaling him to stay back. "This is your last chance, Ryan," Ethan warned, his voice now filled with authority none of them had heard from him before. "Drop it, and we end this nonsense." Blinded by humiliation and rage, Ryan lunged at him with the knife. What followed would remain etched in Kennedy High's collective memory for years. With millimeter precision, Ethan dodged the blade, grabbed Ryan's wrist, and, pressing on specific points, forced him to drop the weapon while simultaneously immobilizing him on the ground with a hold that seemed straight out of a martial arts film. "It's over," Ethan said, holding Ryan down effortlessly. "The bullying is over. The threats are over. The fear is over." Face down, his arm painfully twisted behind his back, Ryan desperately nodded. Ethan released him and stood up. He picked up the knife and handed it to Coach Adams, who watched the scene with a mix of astonishment and relief. The silence was broken by a single clap, then another, and suddenly the entire yard erupted in cheers and applause. The students, who had silently witnessed the bullying for weeks, now celebrated the fall of their tormentors. That evening, sitting in the principal's office with his parents and the parents of Ryan, Dylan, and Scott, Ethan calmly recounted his version of events. The knife, along with the video that Scott had recorded, which incriminated all three bullies, served as solid evidence. Ryan, Dylan, and Scott were temporarily suspended, and only Ethan's intervention, requesting they be given a second chance, prevented their permanent expulsion. "Why did you defend them after everything they did to you?" Emily asked him a few days later, as they sat together on a bench in the schoolyard during recess. Ethan shrugged. "Everyone deserves a chance to change and learn from their mistakes. My dad always says real strength isn't about beating others. It's about showing compassion, even to those who never showed it to you." The atmosphere at Kennedy High changed dramatically. Ethan, once the invisible newcomer, now earned the respect and admiration of his classmates. Some even asked him to teach them a few self-defense moves, which prompted Coach Adams to suggest starting a martial arts club at the school. Ryan, once he returned from his suspension, kept his distance and avoided eye contact. Dylan and Scott seemed equally subdued, but about a month after the incident, something unexpected happened. During gym class, while teams were being picked for basketball, Ryan approached Ethan. "Hey," he began, clearly uncomfortable. I wanted to apologize for everything. I was a total jerk." Ethan watched him silently, gauging the sincerity of his words. "I'm not expecting us to be friends or anything," Ryan continued. "I just wanted you to know I've done a lot of thinking about what happened and, well, I'm trying to change." To everyone's surprise, Ethan smiled and extended his hand. "We all make mistakes, Ryan. What matters is that we learn from them." With clear relief, Ryan shook his hand. They wouldn't become best friends overnight, but it was a start. The rest of the school year passed without any major incidents. Ethan's martial arts club became one of the most popular in school, with a strong emphasis on non-violence and respect. Even Dylan joined, surprising everyone with his natural talent. One evening, as Ethan packed up his gear after a club session, Coach Adams approached him. "You know, Parker, when you first came to Kennedy High, I thought you were just another shy kid who would go unnoticed. I'm glad I was wrong." Ethan smiled. "Sometimes the quietest people have the most to offer, Coach Adams. They just need a chance to prove it." Coach Adams nodded approvingly. "You've changed this place, not just because you stood up to Ryan and his crew, but because of how you did it. You've shown that strength doesn't come from being a bully. That respect isn't earned through fear. That's a lesson many adults could learn from." "That's probably the most important thing my dad ever taught me," Ethan said, putting his gear into his backpack. "True strength isn't about hurting others. It's about having the power to avoid doing so, even when you easily could." Walking home that evening, Ethan reflected on the past few months. He had arrived at Kennedy High as a stranger, scared, withdrawn, trying to stay invisible. Now he walked with his head held high. His classmates greeted him with respect, not out of fear, but admiration. His father's words echoed in his mind. "A true warrior doesn't seek demonstrations, Ethan. He knows who he is, and that's enough. He doesn't need anyone's approval, nor does he seek conflict to prove his worth. True strength lies inside, in your character, in your values." For the first time since moving to New York, Ethan felt completely at peace with himself. He had faced his fears, set his boundaries, and stayed true to his values without becoming what he despised. And in doing so, he helped others find a better path as well. Kennedy High was no longer a place he feared, but a place where he had found his voice, his place, and even new friends. All because he finally stopped hiding and showed his true strength, not with fists or threats, but with dignity, control, and compassion. That evening, as they had dinner, Ethan shared his day with his parents. His father looked at him with unmistakable pride. "I'm proud of you, son," he said. "Not because of your kickboxing skills, but because of how you chose to use them. That's the mark of a true champion." Ethan smiled, knowing that the real victory hadn't been defeating Ryan behind the courts. It had been turning a situation of hate and fear into an opportunity for growth and change, not just for himself, but for the entire Kennedy High community. The boy, who had once been the target of mockery and humiliation, hadn't become another bully, but something far stronger. An example of how true power lies in self-control, dignity, and the ability to extend a hand even to those who once caused you pain. Because, as Ethan had learned, the greatest strength isn't knowing how to strike, but knowing when to stop. And the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy, but showing a better way forward.